Welcome to the Why in Poetry, a series of conversations with poets, their nuances, their thoughts, and of course, poetry. And I hope you enjoy all of these conversations as much as I did. I am with Sol, and tell the people who you are.
Fantastic. Yeah. Hi. My name is Sol Rios, and I am a poet. I was born in Guajone, Peru, the very south of Peru, and came to the States very young, and just kind of, I've been living on the East Coast. Grew up on the East Coast, and I self-published a book last year, Ghost of My Ghosts, and that's kind of been the culmination of my writing journey up until now. And so now I'm excited to see what lies ahead. You know what I mean? And so I have been in all these years that I've been writing, and all these years that I've been, out of school and everything, I've been focusing more on teaching and learning and how I like to learn specifically. And I'll probably dive into it again later, but essentially I pride myself very much in this approach to skill acquisition, and so that's kind of been my focus as a poet, has been more in um, uh, how do we as poets develop that skill?
Yeah,
What does that look like? You know what I mean? And so I'm very excited to dive into this.
oh, this is so good. Yes. So overall, like I said before we started recording, you are my guinea pig. My overall idea is that I personally had a poem that turned into something completely different when it got published. And I'm just
Mm,
like, people don't really know what was the intention behind the poem. Once it's out, be it a
mhm.
collection, be it a poem, whatever, it becomes its own thing, right? Based on how
Absolutely.
somebody reads
Yeah.
it. So I just want to discuss that, right? And just tell
Yeah.
me more about skill acquisition. I think that's something super important as poets for us to know.
Of course. I can't take full credit
Mhm.
for any of what my approach is to that. Actually, it's very funny. The poem I chose today was Wasp holding.
Mhm.
And I'm very excited to get into the story behind that because there
Yeah.
is, in fact, a story. There aren't behind a lot of my poems, but I am really excited for that one. But what I was going to say was that it ties very much into the things that got me into skill acquisition, right? So
Mhm.
I am a trained grappler. I spend a lot of my time outside of work. If I'm not writing, I'm grappling or I'm, doing something of that nature.
Mhm.
And actually, my approach to writing mirrors,
Feels that way. Yeah.
a lot of that approach to jujitsu and to grappling and everything. And so, um,
Ooh,
yeah, I'm excited. Did you?
I
Were we
haven't.
gonna start with the poem or end with the
Yeah, we can
poem?
start with the poem. We can start with the poem. So if you want to read it, talk about it, however you want to do it. I did get a chance to read it, so I can agree that it does feel kind of like you're hanging on a cliff type of thing. So I'm feeling it.
Absolutely.
So take
Yeah,
it
for
away.
sure. So, Wasp Holding is a newer poem.
Hmm.
This is a poem that came about. I know the initial idea I had for it came about in January.
Hmm.
I have more recently been journaling, like physically, like actually writing down, physically handwriting,
Hmm.
journaling versus like the past several years. And when I started writing, I would just use my laptop.
Hmm.
Um, but this poem came from just a little note. I think I set it aside and I was just like, oh, this would be something good to write about. And this idea of wasps actually has been on my mind for a long time. I think as early as maybe a decade ago.
Hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
Wasps worked their way into my poems, and I wasn't really sure why they were there, and I didn't wasn't sure what they represented, but they were kind of in and out of my poems, and I just kind of like let it be.
Mm.
And what this poem was I had an encounter with a wasp, and I was maybe in first grade,
Mm-hmm.
and I think we were like standing against the wall, me and a bunch of kids, and we had to stand completely still. I still remember the command. They were like, "You need to stand as still as a tree," and as I'm standing there, arms outstretched, I see this huge wasp,
Oh my God.
just come out, land on my hand, and I am just panicking.
Right.
And I remember I had a series of like it just got really bad. I had an allergic reaction to the sting.
Oh.
I got stung in the ankle. I had several experiences after that with wasps and hornets, and every single one brought its own set of like nightmares, right?
Gosh.
But the funny thing is I think more recently I started thinking about my own personal like relationship to wasps, and how I like for a long time I was just kind of like I don't understand why they're so mean. I don't understand why they're so angry. And I was thinking of this image, right? And I was thinking of the wasp and how they are insects. They're just here to survive. That's their drive. Their drive is for survival. It's to hunt. It's to be able to live. It's to be able, it's all these things. Um, and that fight in them, I think, kind of really inspired me, because it doesn't matter how small they are. It doesn't matter,
Mm-hmm.
what they're up against. You see a wasp,
Yeah,
you
you
know
know.
what I mean? You're running in the other
Okay.
direction. And I think I'm just gonna go ahead and read it first, and then I'll talk some more about it. But
Yeah, go ahead.
um, yeah, this is Wasp holding. Spills out from my hold. Havoc is a promise. You're in the way, and I'm about to get real loud about it. You fight to live and fight like a mother. What wrath bore upon a small set of hands, praying to a god of insects, praying to keep it together, like clasping at a wasp. I clumsy my anger. Grow your ankles a grapefruit. Your friends make fists and beat me into the ground. My hands a small rose garden. I break out in hives. I carry the weeks in my arms, remembering. The wasp, please select all that apply. Maybe I am also A, made of gold, B, made of God, C, made of wrath, desolate. I despise in me what aches, to lay and let what kills me kill me. I'll die a dirty fight. I rally my teeth, fight to a dog's death, despite the heartbreak of living, held tight to my chest, tight to my chest, tight to my chest, tight to my chest. Nothing holds me anymore. I survive everything. I spill and make a problem about it. Thank
I love
you.
this so much. I think just overall, I love being able to hear the poem in the way
Mhm.
that you meant to read it. Because I know I'm putting, different pauses and different things just based
Of
on the
course.
visual nature of it. But to
Mhm.
be able to feel it, I think it hits even harder where I'm like, okay, I'm feeling
Yeah.
feeling it in my chest now. So just wanted to give a little love
Absolutely.
to this poem because I'm like, this is gorgeous. Not
Thank
just
you.
visually, but it's a really intelligently crafted poem.
I really appreciate that. It was I think recently I've been holding on to this image of a wasp, right? And particularly with my anger.
Mm,
I think just with the stresses of today's world. I mean, if it's not, um,
absolutely.
everything that's going on in, occupied Palestine, if it's not everything that's going on, just here in the States, in terms of like just making a living wage, getting from day to day, dealing with just everything, you know what I mean? I've noticed I have been struggling, and everyone is tired, and keeping it together, not letting these frustrations get the best of me. I'm like now realizing almost how bad of a pushover I was before, and how, reserved I was and how afraid I was to take up space. And I've been having a couple encounters recently where the way I described it to my friend was like, it feels like I'm holding a wasp in my hand and the wasp, like I'm trying to catch it, like I'm trying to hold on to it. And it's so ineffective. And but it's also, I think what I tried to get away from was this feeling of like trying to keep it together, trying to hold it all the time, and instead letting it protect me, letting my anger kind of lead in a way that I think really aligns with what I believe. You know what I mean? Really aligns with the fact that no, I deserve to be here. I deserve to take up space here. I deserve to demand respect when I feel disrespected. You know what I mean? And so these types of things have been happening, and this was a poem I kind of like kept coming back to because I kept feeling clumsy with anger. It's not something I'm used to holding. It's not something I'm used to giving space to,
I love I love the wording of that, because it is hard to live in the righteous rage, right? Without it consuming you. But also being able to figure out, like, how do I not create walls around my rage?
Exactly. I think also, just personally, I always had a very big issue with like rage. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, this idea of rage and wrath versus just like, being frustrated or angry by something is just, it's deep. It's really deep. You know what I mean? It's in there, and it's at least for myself, like if I am perceived to be angry, it's taken extremely differently, especially like as a trans woman, especially as a non-white person. This is like, I don't know. And so like just sitting with this idea has been really interesting. And I like how this poem came out. I think it was really interesting what you said about hearing my reading of it. And what's funny is that the poem for me is always in the instance that you see it, and it depends on the context that when you're reading it. It depends on what mood you're in when you're reading it. It depends on what's jumping out. There's so many factors that play into that. And I think a big part of becoming a poet first had to be that hurdle of like, I don't always know how people are going to take this. You know what I mean? I don't always know if people are going to get what I'm trying to say. And I think a big part of me leaning into my writing was understanding that's okay. That's all right. And I think like as long as I approach the poem with what I can offer it, as long as I can approach the poem with care and with this idea of like, I'm really going to try to present something that I'm proud of, and people are going to bring to that what they can. And if they take something from it, fantastic. And if they don't, then hey, it's there, and so
right.
I don't know. That's how I've been trying to think of it recently.
Has it changed the way you shape your work?
Yeah. Yes. I mentioned earlier that now my poems now look more the way I approach my fighting routines, right? I think before I was very into the struggling artist kind of, tormented. I mean, it was just like my laptop there. I would like, write whenever I could. It would be like 3 a.m. and I would write for hours and come out with nothing. And so it was very, I don't want to say disorganized, but very much just like tied to when inspiration would hit, which is always convenient time, but hey, that was where I would really embrace that, you know what I mean? And kind of just get out of its way. What I've been doing more recently has been more intentional about the focus and attention and intention that I'm bringing to the poem. And the ways that I do that, it's interesting. So my coach is jiu-jitsu black belt coach. He's Greg Souders, trained at Standard Jiu-Jitsu. And he essentially takes this grappling art and that is very, very early in its stages right now. In its training stages, like one thing I really love how this guy said it. This guy from my gym described it as still in its leather helmet stage. You
Still,
know, this is what the sport of jiu-jitsu grappling is.
uh-huh.
And so we're approaching learning in a way that is extremely traditional and is, extremely ineffective for the results we were trying to produce today. And so, obviously, when you stray from that, when you try to approach something differently, you're going to get a lot of feedback. You're going to get a lot of backlash. You're going to get a lot
Yeah.
of these things. However, what I found is that I started training under this approach, which Greg Souders got it from Rob Gray, and I actually have Rob Gray's Dr. Rob Gray's book here. It's a fantastic book. It's How We Learn to Move, and that's on Amazon. And it's basically a different way to approach learning skills in ball sports, right? So very specifically, it's talking about tennis, it's talking about volleyball, it's talking about all these different ball sports and how you can approach acquiring these skills. And the way that you go about it is that you set up these little games and you set little constraints and then you let the person play. You have a task, right? You have an objective, you know what the constraints are, and somehow within trying to get that objective, you pick up a skill that is necessary towards learning the sport at the end. And so my coach does this and he takes this framework that's applied to, different ball sports. And now he takes that and resynthesizes it for grappling. You know what I mean? Where that environment is different from like a soccer field. It's different from a volleyball court. You know what I mean? This is the environment becomes one person and another person, right? What becomes really interesting then about that is, I was training under this system. Now I started at his gym maybe October 2022. And I'd been training before. I trained like 9 years before and spent this past year, almost 2 years now, at this gym training consistently. And it's almost like the first 10 years of my training didn't even matter. Wow. You know what I mean? Because I came in and the foundational level of some of the newer students was enough to overwhelm me, right? And so it was this clear difference in skill acquisition, this clear difference in skill retention, this clear difference in just sound decision making in this art of fighting. And me being a poet, I'd always kept writing separate from my fight, right? I think I somehow knew that my queerness, my transness, complicated this extremely masculine environment that I would go to every week, several times a week. And it complicates things for me, right? It complicates my relationship to grappling. And I think I used to see that as such a negative thing versus looking at it as something that like really gave me an interesting perspective to my own masculinity and to my own relationship to physical dominance, right? And my own relationship to like all of these things that like scared me. I got into fighting because I was afraid of confrontation. So then what came of this poem was learning over the years that like, no, I can, sit myself down and do this thing that I'm scared of. I can throw myself into this environment that horrifies me. You know what I mean? It's a nightmare. But at the same time, it was extremely gratifying to be able to do something that was extremely difficult. What I've been excited about now is taking the same approach that helped me in grappling. And now in the past year, I've seen like leaps and bounds in my own skill in grappling and asking, what does this same framework look like in something as abstract as poetry, right?
Yeah, I'm literally taking notes because I'm like, I think of this kind of, I have a friend who knew that basically the scary environment for me would be form, right? Have I've had beef with form. It's very classic. It's very
Oh yeah.
white, very, and I'm
Mhm.
like, I don't know how to feel about this. And
Yeah.
it feels like she's like, okay, let's try this particular form, hence the task, right? Just put this poem that you already have into this form and let's see what happens. And I think what having the constraint, having that objective literally is like, okay, I have this little square here so I don't get overwhelmed by this hugeness of
Mhm.
what everything else means. And so I think it's brilliant.
Oh yeah, it's been really fun, right? I have me and this writer. I call up every week, at least twice a week. We write in the mornings.
Mm,
Silas Denver Melvin,
mhm,
and it's been really interesting because we haven't even touched forms yet. Forms I eventually want to get to,
mhm.
but I think right now we've had to go back to like the very beginning,
Yeah.
right? We've had to go back to like the question that you first started with, like, right, like what is poetry, like
Mhm,
actually, like what is that? It's been an extremely interesting journey back to that, right?
mhm.
Because then what actually is the poem that we are trying to create? What are the skills that we are trying to create? And so like a lot of our like games
Mhm.
have to be different because it's something as abstract as writing, you know what I
Yeah.
mean, as marks on a page, and so the way I've been trying to approach this is trying to look for Rob Gray has this term, invariance. You know what I
Mm,
mean? There's so many things that are variable, right? In the environment of poetry, right? In this landscape of poetry, there's so many things. I mean, you think of spacing, you think of line breaks, you think of, and you name
yeah.
you name it. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? It can go any which way. And so how do we start to hone this? And I think the interesting or what I've been able to come down to first, right? These are some of the early lessons that we've been doing over the past couple of weeks, has been coming down to just sound, coming down to building an image, and coming down to just, you know, the pulse of the poem, finding the pulse of the poem, finding the thread of the poem, right? And we do these short little bursts of like 2 minute, 3 minute, writing sessions, like just like extremely short. And it's incredible because these things, like, you end up with like a couple lines of something.
Mm-hmm.
And the fun thing is that you can then propagate that. You can then take that
Ooh.
apart and be like, okay, from this couplet, where am I being called to take this poem? And so like,
Mm.
between the two of us, we've been sending out submissions, and we are newer to sending out submissions because I
Mm.
think I personally um, also had a lot of issues with the canon. Also had a lot of issues with form. Also is just extremely overwhelmed with this world of dead white poets that I didn't know what to do with, that I didn't really have access to. I didn't go to school for poetry.
Same.
You know what I mean? And just honestly, my interest wasn't there.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and what's been interesting now is now going back to this newer approach that I've been taking. It now allows me to go back into these poems and be like, what was it that worked for them? What was
Yeah.
it what are the reasons why these are important? Which, of course, like I think every poet does need to go back and like pay their dues and kind of understand like what like who are
Work.
they writing from? What is their writing descendants, right?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, like what worked here, being the study,
Yeah,
like the
exactly.
student of these things that have surpassed time.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. It's been exciting. I think also I was very lucky coming into poetry
Mm-hmm.
because um I got into poetry because of a podcast. Actually, I wasn't really into poems because of like, I mean, I was into Neruda. I was into a couple of spoken word poets I really liked. I'd heard a couple of things here and there, but I, like, by accident one day,
Mm-hmm.
and I remember it was 2016, and
Mm-hmm.
I was at the airport, and I think it was in Florida. I may have been in Florida, and I um, started listening to this poetry podcast. I was looking for poetry podcasts,
Hmm.
and I ended up finding, I think it was the Poetry Gods. Are
Hmm.
you familiar with
Yes,
them?
yes. What a time.
Literally could not have chosen a better entry point into poetry.
Absolutely.
You know
Hmm.
what I mean? I think coming into um coming into poems like at all was just such a daunting thing. And then being able to see, these friends get
Yeah.
into it, together and have these incredible conversations and just, not even always about the poem, just about their lives. I think gave me such an entry point into realize that like, oh, I could do this.
Right.
I could get to that point. I could write like this, you know what I mean? And it was really exciting. It was really exciting. It gave me access to so many writers I still look up to today. I still go back to today. I'm still buying old books from them. I'm still going back and picking up their stuff at the library, and I
Yeah.
could list you 40 plus names. And it was funny because I was just out of college. Um, and I think I had just like unfollowed a bunch of friends from high school on like Twitter or something. And I just followed a bunch of poets. And I think the reason why I had separated myself was because I was very new to like figuring out who I was. I was like, I want to find out who I am independent of everybody. And I just kind of followed these poets for a little while. And it was interesting, it was interesting then being able to build this relationship with poetry at the same time that I was building the same relationship with jujitsu. Same
Mm,
thing, I was just going
absolutely.
there. And it was just these two like parallel lines of my life that were
Mhm.
moving together and just never moved. And so now I'm excited because Wasp holding this poem was kind of that entry point, right? Writing about
Beginning.
the fight without writing about it. I don't know.
I love this. I'm always so curious of like how did we all get here into this little crazy world that is poetry? And
Yeah.
I love the fact that it's like you aren't somebody who studied. You didn't have like this big head start of all of these poets. Like now is when I'm also like, okay, here are the elders. Let me go read some of these elders. Like I didn't know about these people. And so it's a fascinating experience to have, especially after self-publishing.
Oh
Because that's
yeah.
how I started. I was like, I'm just gonna publish this thing.
Yeah.
Maybe my mom will like read it and like three of my friends. The next thing you know, boom, I'm in this random poetry world and it's
Mhm.
just
Exactly. Yeah.
so
What
there's
was it? What was it that drew you to the self-publishing?
I'm very much I feel like I'm a bit niche because I have like Spanish and Creole and English and I'm like already I don't want to explain my languages.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
this has a fantasy arc. Like I'm doing the absolute most in this book, and I don't know who's gonna read it. I might as well just do
Yeah.
this myself. And
I
so,
and I exactly because I asked because I was thinking about that for myself as well. I was
mhm.
like, I think like, of course, I'd love to one day be published by somebody, but I think I just needed to do it myself first to see what it was all about. You know what I mean? And I didn't want my message to be changed. I didn't want, to have to explain things. And like I think it came from a very like me personally, like now looking back like a couple months ago, I'm like, okay, maybe I could have, maybe I could have done some things differently. Maybe I could have taken more time with this. I think like I set the deadline uh maybe too early. but um
Get it.
but I'm also a perfectionist. So this was something that like I had been trying to get out for years and years and years and just kept pushing it back. And so finally just being able to have it out was kind of like, okay, oh, like that's what the book is.
Right.
That's what Ghost is. You know what I mean? That's what my grief looks like in a book in that snapshot of that
Of
month. You know what I mean?
time.
Because it's not
Yes.
it was so funny going through it because we came down to the last month of writing this book, right? I came down to the last couple of weeks, and within those last 2 weeks, the book changed so drastically
Oh, yes.
with like minor changes, right? I would switch a
Mhm.
poem around, I would add a comma, I would do things like this, and it was like it was a different book every single time this happened.
Mhm.
This is what I think is like the extremely interesting thing about what you said about like when we read a poem, you're
Hmm.
seeing a snapshot of that
Right.
poem's life. Sometimes that poem goes out and then you come back to it years later and you're like,
And you're like,
oh, this has changed. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, this is a different poem. Like, I don't even recognize her. Like, you know?
right. It's like, okay, we could have removed a couple of these sentences in here, you know?
Yeah. Oh my God. But you're always the best editor once the poem's been published, right? It's always like,
And it's
oh,
also, I think I was at an O Miami event and
mm,
Clint Smith was talking about how like sometimes it's embarrassing to see your old stuff, right? Like your old books and
mm,
all this stuff. And a friend of his said, this is literally like an album, right? Like this is literally a
yeah.
snapshot of who you were at that time. It's basically like history, I'm paraphrasing, but like
Oh, that's
it's
so
our
cool.
history, right? Existing there in that point in time that we can go back to and look at it.
Yeah, exactly.
And I'm just like,
And
that
I
is
love that idea. I love that idea. I had to take a long time away from my book.
mm-hmm.
I don't know if you had a similar experience, but I had to like as soon as it was out, um, I couldn't open it.
Oh
I
yeah.
couldn't look at it. I couldn't read it. I just
Mm-hmm.
almost like tried to forget it existed.
Mm-hmm.
Because it was just out there, you know, and like, okay, I'll let it do its thing. If people like it, whatever. Kind of like you said, like if
Yeah.
I know my mom's gonna read it,
Right.
and that's about it. And
Yeah.
that's one customer I know for sure. And then everyone else, like, we'll see what happens, you know. But uh as you were saying, it was like, you know, like this idea of it being like a snapshot of like this is where my life was at the time. And I think I was putting a lot on myself because like we deal with these heavy themes, you know, grief is not easy. And I was like, am I gonna, I think I was very worried of approaching grief the wrong way
Mm-hmm.
or in a way that didn't honor maybe the people I wanted to remember. And
Mm-hmm.
so I think the step I took was one more realizing that the grief I was bringing to people was my grief, you know,
Yeah.
um, I'm bringing myself to the people that changed my life and
Mm-hmm.
who are not there anymore. But it's not them that's there. It's my projection onto them that like I've carried with me, and now like you know, and I think being able to see it that way kind of took that pressure off of me.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And instead let me reinterpret like, okay, like what is my relationship to death? What is my relationship to the world around me? What is the type of life I want to live? You know what I mean? And I wasn't expecting to learn so much from myself at the scale that I think the book allowed me to.
I love that.
I've always tried to be like introspective and kind of like learning and kind of journaling and coming back to this. I don't know, like the book allowed me a way to kind of like really look into myself and be like, oh, okay, this
This
is
is
me.
happening. Yeah.
And also it's not me forever. You know what I mean? I can continue. I can continue writing from here. I'm not boxed into that, and I'm going to, right? You know, and so
Mhm.
that's where I'm very actively. I think the book allows me to kind of like remember that, like, oh no, I have agency over my life in a way where I can create the life I want to see, right? You know, and it's like a calling to do that, right? You know, it's like
Yeah.
you've written this thing, you've written these silly words, you know, you put this out. Now, what are you gonna do?
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? I don't know.
It's overwhelming sometimes. Um,
It absolutely can be.
and I think also it's very interesting to experience the book over time.
Oh yeah.
Being able to like go back and read, and then, at least for me, of course, also grief, but like romantic grief and all of these different
Mhm.
things,
Mhm.
and say, hey, I'm not here anymore.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
like there's power in that too.
Mhm.
Also, sometimes being like, wow, I was really down bad. This was crazy. But
Hey,
being
sometimes.
a you make space. It's like
Yeah.
each book is you kind of like reorganizing the closet of all of these like skeletons that we hold on to and being like, oh, I got space for like new things now.
Hmm.
Um, but I also think there is this, I don't know if it's like depression, but there is this level of like hollowness, sadness, some kind of feeling once the book is out. It's kind of like
Hmm.
I've emptied myself, and now what do I do with myself?
Yeah. That's been really funny.
Mm,
I think because, well, first of all, for me personally, like everything happened that same month that the book came out. You know, the
mm,
book was supposed to come out on Halloween. It was already set to like release. Um, and then, you know, I mean, it was just ridiculous. It was the events of October 7th. And then I was just like staring at my phone the rest of the month, you know what I mean?
yeah,
And we're just watching this genocide play out and the book releases, you know what I mean? And like I
yeah,
kind of like had already had the manuscript done at that point. I already kind of didn't really talk about it or anything, but it was like my life almost completely came to a standstill. Around
yeah.
that time, I think I also got injured.
Mm.
So I wasn't training. And
So full stop.
exactly, yeah, it was just complete. I think I had stopped training and I was out of work.
Ugh, which
So
is
I had maybe, a few months of just this pause, you know what I mean? And where it was really like, okay, I had to sit and I had to reevaluate and I had to look at my life and I had to really like
mm-hmm.
look at what I'm doing and what am I doing right now, and what are you building? What are
Hey,
you trying to do?
what is
And it
the
was
purpose of
very concrete. Sorry.
no, it's literally like, what's the purpose of all this?
Mm-hmm.
Which is huge.
And what is my role in all of it? You know what
Mm,
I mean? And like, what can I bring to the conversation that isn't just going to serve me, but is going to serve a future where
yeah,
everybody's liberated. You know what I mean? And I think it was really important for that to happen. And what I've noticed now is that, like, particularly with this new approach I've been doing, I don't just write when I'm inspired now, but now I have a schedule. I sit down, and now it's so funny to me because I sit down to write, and I'm like editing my poems for like to go up for submissions and stuff like that. And so many of my poems have like bird watching. So many of my poems have my morning coffee.
mhm.
They have my cats next to me, and like they'll just work themselves into my poem, and it's because I'm experiencing them. And when I'm writing, this is what's presented to me, and this is what I'm experiencing, and this is where I'm at.
Mhm.
Um, and it's been really exciting because it's like, okay, I am training myself to find beauty in my everyday, and beauty in just the morning cup of coffee I have, in my cat sitting next to me when I'm writing, and in my just these small things. And like I've been forced to slow down.
Yeah,
And now obviously, like, I'm back at work, I'm back at training, I don't know, I'm trying to do a whole bunch of things now. You know what I mean? As much as I can, I'm trying to keep myself busy, and writing becomes this time to kind of like stop and like really take what's presented to me.
be present.
And it's less to make a poem about it and more just to train the ear for the poem that I
Mm.
want to write. You know what I mean? And so I'm looking for the sounds. I'm looking for what's presented to me. And in this way, the world and in the way I interact with it today will find itself in my poems. I don't have to try to write a poem about one thing. I don't have to try to write a poem. I more have to get out of its way.
Mm.
And it's been a very, I think, it's been almost like a relief to approach poetry that way,
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
it's just kind of like, I'm going to let the poem be the poem.
Mm.
And what finds its way into the poem, I can later, do my editing and really come down to what I want to say. But it's less sitting down and like trying,
Yes.
what I mean, versus just allowing those movements to really dictate the poem. And I don't know, it's been very exciting, it's been very freeing. And I've been uh, really excited to look at what ways to approach that. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Wow. I'm ruminating because I'm like, feels like I went to a master class. Okay.
No,
Been in like a
absolutely not.
yeah, just like the many perspectives that we have and being able to share them, there's always something there
Mhm.
to just like, this was yummy. I'm gonna hold on to this. And so
For
um
sure.
it gives me a little bit more space to figure out what is the purpose of all this, right? Between
Yeah.
the genocides in Palestine, in Darfur, in the Democratic Republic of Congo, and we keep going, right? Like the list does not
Literally,
end.
it goes on.
It
It goes
goes
on.
on, and it's like in the lands where poets are persecuted, what words am I providing towards either reimagining just because that's where my jam is, but overall liberation?
Exactly.
And
I've
so,
been thinking a lot about that, a
mm,
lot about, um, yeah, like what is a poet's role in
yeah,
all of this? Like, especially if what I had gotten back down to is that like poetry, um, was started as an oral tradition before we
yeah,
ever made marks, right? It started as an oral tradition. And so the speaker was very physically just the speaker,
yes.
you know what I mean? And how then that's changed when we introduced writing, when we introduced specifically like what languages, right, and how do we use language, and then looking at that in the context of today, in that how is language then used to Hanif Abdurraqib has an incredible talk on YouTube, I think, on manufacturing consent, and I
Mm-hmm.
think he has this conversation with millennials against capitalism,
Mm-hmm.
and it's on YouTube. I would absolutely recommend it. But they talk about manufacturing consent, you
Mm-hmm.
know, how language right now used by these media outlets is used to skew the truth, to send out misinformation, to dispel misinformation, all these things.
Yeah.
It's incredible what is being done, just to in this environment of language as
Mm-hmm.
we know it, of the English language specifically, and then how is that then used in like specifically in like legal spaces, right?
Oh
Specifically
yeah.
in medical space, how are these things, just language in general is just I look at the wording of these things and it just blows my mind how manipulated it is. And
Mm-hmm.
so that as poets, if the environment we approach then is this landscape of language, of sound, of perception,
Mm-hmm.
we come to the page and we're looking at these markings in a way that makes sense to us. And so then the way we attach meaning to things comes down to that very perception.
Absolutely.
um, what I'm very curious about is that, like, as poets, then is it meant to be evocative, right? Is it like, are we then writing to evoke this feeling for the need for change? You know what I mean? Like what is revolutionary poetry? And so, like,
Mm-hmm.
more recently, I was kind of like sitting with a lot of the work of Palestinian martyrs,
Mm-hmm.
who have who have been killed by Israel, and whose work we've lost. And I mourn like all of the books lost
Oh,
now
yeah.
in the university, and every this it's cultural genocide, right? um and this was more my entry into like revolutionary poetry and all of these things, is that, like, okay, now looking at like Hassan Kafani, looking at Fadi Judah, like, um, these incredible poets who have been writing about the occupation,
Mm-hmm.
writing about um, just these awful circumstances, and it's just bringing attention, right? And so this is where I kind of ended up then, right? Is that, like, as poets, what then is our role? And it's shifting focus. It's shifting the
Mm-hmm.
public focus to a specific moment. If the poem then is a snapshot,
Yes.
what are we bringing that attention to? And I think of Mossab Abu Toha, is a Palestinian poet. He's living in Egypt right now.
Mm-hmm.
And he was detained by the IOF for, I believe it was around like 50 hours. And thankfully, with the poetry community, like being able to speak up about it. And,
Yeah.
now he's been a prominent voice for Gaza. And like when I look at his poems, and I'm not here to analyze necessarily. I'm not here to like, pick anything apart. No, but the poems present what we are seeing on our screens every day. You know what I mean? And so it's taking this extremely tangible things and it's just bringing attention. And then it's what we do with this attention.
Right.
That's the next step, right? And so I think even my own relationship to poetry outside of everything that's happening today, outside of this context of, the like you said, myriad of genocides that are going on, right? How then do I make use of this attention, right? And then it's to act from there. And so I don't know. I know every creative, wants to fix the world in some way. I know it's there because I see people create and they create such beautiful things. And, I've seen your writing and I've seen, how you approach healing and how you approach what you bring the world, you know what I mean? What you bring the world with your art and every artist, I see this in them. And I don't think we should diminish the impact we have. I think instead we have to trust that we've been going as true to ourselves as we can, and then from there, if you learn something, you readjust and you continue. You know what I mean? Because that's all you can do. I think I came to this talk extremely scared, extremely nervous because I don't have any school. I don't have even what I'm learning with regards to this approach to writing that might be a little more structured than I think people like typically approach writing with. I'm at the very beginning. You know what I mean? The way I can continue is only knowing that I don't really know anything.
Right.
I'm kind of just playing. You know what I mean? I'm kind of just like, and this idea of play, I think, is extremely important. It allows me then to explore this art. You know what I mean? Explore this discipline, explore the skill of just actually writing. You know what I mean? And whether it's typing on a computer, writing or memorizing a poem, like all of these things, like when you start thinking about just the physical skill of it, it just expands the world of what the abstract then can be. You know what I mean? And what then does that mean when we're creating new worlds? What does that mean when we're writing new things into existence? And how even just writing a silly little book for me is transformational in terms of how I approach my life. You know what I mean? I think I wrote this entire book about my own politic around my own grief. You know what I mean? And my own approach to life. And so now when I finish that book, I'm like, okay, what steps are you going to take to make that your life? What steps are you going to take to make this possible? And it's been a challenge every day because now it's like, okay, now I got to live that life. Now I have to get up and try. Now I have to, I don't know, continue to grow and throw myself forward. And it's vulnerable. It's scary work, but what else can we do? It's just, what else are you gonna, why not try? Exactly.
Just because it's hard doesn't mean that we're not doing a great job.
Exactly. I also I like that idea, like just because it's hard, like no, exactly, because that brings us back to the Wasp, right?
Yes.
The Wasp will, I mean, they'll square up with anything. It doesn't matter if you are in my way, I will make a problem about it. And it's kind of, and I was having a conversation recently with a friend. We are trying to get a local organization started. I can't give details on it right now, but
when you're ready,
it's but it's very daunting. It's a very daunting project. And I mean, we had this conversation is that like it's very likely that this will not come to fruition. And in that same breath, I can't go another day without moving towards this anyway. And I think that's what's been key, right? Is understanding the gravity of the things that we face and
Mhm.
understanding how important these things are in today's world and for our futures and for our children's futures and all of these things. And saying, I'm still going to take that step forward. And I am riddled with anxiety. I struggle
Oh
leaving the
yes.
house. I cannot, I mean, I will
Yeah.
have one cup of coffee and that's it because I will have panic attacks all day. You know what I mean? So
Right.
it's like, it's forced me to take this aspect of my life seriously and to then be intentional about what am I bringing to my life in all facets, right?
Mhm.
Um, I jumped to jujitsu, and this ecological approach is what it's called, right? It's the
Mhm.
ecological approach to jujitsu, and this is just the ecological approach to skill acquisition.
Mhm.
And now being able to take this with poetry, it's forced me not only to use that lens on poetry, but then to like expand it to the rest of my life, right?
Yeah.
And to then look at like, how am I approaching things? How am I learning things? How
Mm.
am I engaging with my environment? Am I
Mm.
right? And I think this was what pulled me out of myself is that like, okay, I went out and I published this book, but I wasn't in conversation with my community.
Mm.
You know, I haven't been necessarily going to readings. I hadn't been necessarily like, now it's been like, okay, you have this thing. Now what are you going to do with it?
Yeah.
And so more recently it's been I've been looking for different spaces and trying to talk to people, and it's been nerve-wracking. It's been a
It
lot,
is.
you
It's
know?
there is. Yes.
What's
Yeah.
the poetry scene like where you are?
Um, there's a lot more spoken word here.
Mhm.
And so there is this kind of weird unspoken thing between like page poets and spoken word poets, but
Yeah.
like either way, it's a small place, right?
Yeah.
So you're going to an event, you're going to see three other poets from this other event. And so it's a very fascinating experience. And you see that there's like I think it's just like Miami in its own way is like it's not this melting pot, it's a salad, right? There's the
Mm.
tomatoes over here, the lettuce over here. And so it's like it's a dance. It's
Yeah.
basically a dance of like I'm going to all of these things,
Yeah.
right? I'm going
Yeah.
to the spoken word events. I'm going to, the poetry festival events. There's page poetry, there's book. So I think it keeps growing and it keeps
Mhm.
transforming into something of its own. Um, but you find home wherever you're going.
Exactly.
And
Yeah.
so that's the biggest thing for me. There are moments that I've actually like done some readings where, sometimes they don't get what the hell my poem was about. And it is what it is, right? And so um
Yeah.
that's an experience in itself.
Oh yeah, for sure.
It's a
I've
growing experience too.
oh yeah, absolutely. I've haven't read in public very much. I have a couple of times.
Mm.
And the few times that I have, I'm glad. I think I was very intentional to choose poems of mine that were more accessible than my
Yeah.
favorite poems. You know
Mhm.
what I mean? Like I couldn't go for my favorites because my favorites just you'd be like, what the fuck? Like, where are you? I'm sorry. What is this? You know?
Girl, what?
And it's
Yeah.
okay. It's okay. I think
Yeah.
that's why I like those poems. You know, there's reasons why I think I was gonna come back to this actually, is that like writing poetry now for me has been a very intentional a lot of my intentions in my recent poetry has been to say the thing clearly, has been
Yeah.
to, cut out um, this desire for me to make something beautiful,
Yeah.
palatable, to make it, you know, sound good, to make it, whatever any one of these things are, whether I'm writing about my own trauma or writing about, the TV across the, you know what I mean? Like it doesn't matter. Like I want to say the concrete thing. And so much of that, like I'm a Pisces Mercury. This has been the the
You're like,
biggest struggle.
okay.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Is there is no I've had to like pull myself back and kind of like it makes me think of this one this one poem by Jean Anne Lee.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think it's called The Session. It's a fantastic poem, and it's just say it clearly, say it clearly, say it clearly. And this is the thing that just comes back to me, right? This is what plays in my head when I'm writing now. As I come back to it, I write a line, and I'm just kind of like, okay, I know what I'm saying here.
Like,
I'm gonna write that line again, and I'm gonna say it this time. You know what I mean? So it's been a very intentional, just
line
like
failing. Yeah.
dialing it back. Yeah.
I have a Libra Mercury and I do get a lot. This is very flowery. And I'm like, I come back. So I get it.
Exactly. Exactly.
I
I
think
don't think it's a bad thing, right?
no, I think it's then we begin to think about audience, right? Like especially if it's reading. Um, I just chaotically threw myself on stage and I was like, if I don't do this now, I'm never gonna do this. And
Mhm.
I think part of the learning is things can be beautiful and clear,
Yeah.
right? And if it is that the intention is movement work when it comes to poetry, you want to talk to as many people as possible.
Yeah.
And so that's where I'm at too.
That's a great point too, is that I've been thinking about um I noticed such a stark difference because we were talking about it earlier. You said there was a sometimes like there's this divide, right,
Mhm.
between spoken word poetry and
Page
page
poet.
poetry,
Yeah.
right? And I remember at a reading I went to, this was very early on in my poetry journey. Um, I was extremely anxious. I would not go to readings very often, but I did go to this one reading. I was very excited about it. And it was almost like you could hear the page poem in some of
Yeah.
the poems that were read. And I
Hmm.
think I realized as much as I really loved some page poetry, as much as I really loved like that approach to the page, and I think the very visual aspect of it,
Yeah.
um, I think I think some people just kind of like regard it higher than spoken word poetry because of the way that it sounds sometimes, maybe the cadence that people fall into sometimes.
Hmm.
But I think also where do, like I was kind of like, well, which one am I? Do I want to have this type of sound? Do I want to have this type of look?
Hmm.
And I think especially with this poem that I presented today, it was kind of like I really love playing with format. I really love playing with different places on the page. I really love that visual aspect of it. And also I want my poem to read okay. I want that poem to sound to be like I need to hear my sound. That's been a really like critical part of my recent editing has been
Hmm.
I have to hear it from me. I have to hear the way I'm going to read it. And if it doesn't, if I play it back and I can't play through it, like, like
Yeah.
back at the drawing board, you know what I mean? It's a very intentional, just, I need to know what sounds I'm going for,
Yeah.
and I don't know. It's been very interesting journey. Like I said, I think I was like very worried about what category I would fall into.
Yeah.
And like you said, like you just kind of bring what you have and you will find your place among it wherever it is, right? And whichever way it is. But it's also, I think what people forget is that when you bring yourself into that poem, it becomes just you. Like you don't fall
Yeah.
into this very neat category
Oh,
of spoken word poet or you know what I mean? I mean, you could say like I think people place us
yes.
sometimes in these categories, and people sometimes like will racially profile us, or
Absolutely.
like you'll become
Absolutely.
this poet. You know what I mean? And
Hmm.
it's that's its own problem, I think, in and of itself. But I think of like what we can bring as poets, right? And into these spaces is knowing authentically that I really believe in what I'm writing
Hmm.
and I really trust what I'm writing.
Hmm.
And if you're going to dismiss my poetry because of either like what it looks like or what it sounds like or whatever these things, then it's not for you, and that's okay. But it's here. You know what I mean? Whoever
Whoever
is
it's
going to
for,
utilize
it's
it,
for.
exactly,
Yep.
exactly.
As we're talking, what I think a lot about the kind of like riff between page poetry and spoken word is there's a communal experience that happens with spoken word that doesn't necessarily happen with page poems because you're writing by yourself,
Yeah,
right? I don't know about you, but I can be a very selfish poet. You know, sometimes people are like, "Oh, what about audience?" And I'm like, "What do you mean?
Fuck the audience. Yeah.
I'm not worried about this." So,
I'm sorry. Can I cuss? I'm so
no,
sorry.
you're fine. You're absolutely. I cuss like a sailor on this podcast.
Good.
And I think that's part of the problem, right? As you said, poets started with the oral storytelling
Yeah.
from jump. And
Yeah.
I think there's a hunger for community that sometimes gets lost along the way.
Yeah. Absolutely. That's that. I think that was such a jarring part of self-publishing this book. I think that
Mhm.
realization. And it was that, okay, like, yes, I had sat down for what, 5+ years to write these poems. And it was like I incubated them, right? You know, it was
Yes.
like they were here. And maybe one or two, I came out to a reading and kind of like threw one out there and tried to see how it did, or
Mhm.
put one on social media and tried to see how it did. But like it was very much a solo project, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? And I think you're right. Like I've been thinking about it a lot, this
Mhm.
community aspect of poetry, right? Now, me writing with even just one other person has opened up that avenue, you know, and has opened up this dialogue for my poetry to exist in a space where not even necessarily like, because we're not criticizing each other's work necessarily right now. We are making work alongside each other, but
Mhm.
it allows me to kind of like take myself out of myself and realize people hear this and people may not get this and people are going to
Yeah.
interact with this. People are going to bring what they can to this. And so
Mhm.
now, like I said, I'm trying to be more intentional about going to these readings and
Yeah.
reaching out to people who I want to engage with, you know, whose work I want to engage with. And you are also someone I've been meaning to reach out to you, because I've been seeing the work you've been doing, and like to get people's work out there and to put your own work out there. And it's
Absolutely.
um, curating the space. I think like I've for a
Yeah.
couple
No, I,
months now, I've been like, okay, I'm gonna reach out. I'm gonna reach out. Okay, I'm
I'm
gonna do it today.
so, I'm so with it. I think a lot of people ask me what poets I am in relationship or conversation with. And the majority of the people that I would say, you might not know, right? And I think that's the thing. There's so many, I couldn't even create a playlist with all the poets that I know that I'm like, okay, this is the mood for this. And so
Exactly.
there are so many messages that need to be heard, so many conversations, be it inner or outer, that I think as a whole we need in the poetry community and whoever joins us.
For
And
sure.
so I am so grateful
Yes.
overall. As we wrap up, right? Let's do the whole wrapping up is like, where do we find your work? Where can we get the book? All of the
Yeah.
things.
So yeah, I am so I just recently had some poems blow up on Tumblr. So I
Yes,
guess my
come on,
poems are on
Tumblr.
there.
Uh-huh.
Throwback. I don't know if Tumblr's gonna be still
We have no idea.
running by the time this comes out, but hey, you know, if so, it's on Tumblr.
Mhm.
Um, However, my book Ghost of My Ghost is available on Amazon.
Okay.
Um, it is also half price right now. So,
Okay. Okay.
um, and yeah, hopefully we'll be having some poems forthcoming in the next couple of weeks. We'll see. Um, but as of right now, you can find me on Instagram at Soul Leader. That's SOLEATER. I think it's two R's. I don't know. It's something on
I
there.
follow you. I'll double check.
I'm sure I can. Yeah, I'm sure you can include it in the description or something like that. But thank you so much for this opportunity. It was great talking to you. And thank you for allowing me a space to be able to talk about poems at all. You know, it's,
Absolutely.
yeah,
Poets are such interesting folks that I'm just like, tell me whatever you got going on in your mind. I've learned so many things. And so for that, I am grateful. And we're always here, right?
fantastic.
Communities.
Thank you so much.
Whatever I can figure out, let me know. Send me a message. If I have no idea, I'll find somebody. I know
Fantastic.
somebody who knows somebody. We'll figure it out.
Absolutely. We
Thank
love that. We love that. Thank you so much. Appreciate your time.
Thank you. Thank you.